One of the strangest phones ever made wasn't built by a phone company, but was built by Boeing, the plane company. Around 2014, while most companies were trying to sell smartphones to as many people as possible, Boeing was looking at government agencies, military contractors, and intelligence workers who were increasingly carrying normal smartphones, and realizing those devices were never really built for classified communication. So instead of making a phone like another consumer device, Boeing spent about 3 years building one a lot more defensive and secure. The result was something called the Boeing Black, and right away it was obvious that this wasn't a normal phone. Boeing said it wouldn't be sold in stores, through carriers, or to the public at all. And it was only available directly through Boeing or its approved partners, specifically for government and security related customers. And the feature that got all of the attention was its so-called self-destruct system, which sounds dramatic, but it didn't blow up or anything like that. If someone physically opened the casing, removed certain screws, or tried messing with the internals, the phone could automatically wipe its encryption keys, erase the software, destroy any stored data, and basically turn itself into a brick. It also had dual SIM support, modular hardware, and could even be fitted with satellite or biometric modules. And then after the announcement, it pretty much disappeared with almost no public information about who actually used it. One of the first real government smartphones was built by General Dynamics, and it was called the Sectra Edge. Back in the mid-2000s, senior military officials, intelligence agencies, and government leadership had a pretty big problem that, if you wanted to make classified calls, check secure email, or access government networks, you usually had to be inside a secure facility and sitting at some military communication setup. So General Dynamics tried something that basically shrunk all of that into a device. By 2007, units were already being delivered, and by 2011, thousands had reportedly gone out to US government agencies, including hundreds to the Air Force. It was actually certified to handle classified communications, including top secret voice calls, secure messaging, and access to government networks from basically anywhere. It even used the same Type 1 encryption the US government uses for other classified communications. And what's kind of crazy is it could do all of that over normal cellular networks, Wi-Fi, even standard commercial infrastructure, encrypting everything before it ever left the device. It did look like a chunky 2006 BlackBerry and less like some cool sleek phone, but it was one of the first phones that helped change classified communications and make it more mobile, and ended up discontinued sometime around 2015. One of the newest government phones wasn't built from scratch like the older ones, but was built by Samsung, and it was called the Samsung Galaxy S20 Tactical Edition. Back in 2020, while the military had spent years using bulky dedicated hardware for secure communications, agencies were starting to want something different. They wanted modern smartphone hardware, better cameras, better battery life, 5G, app support, just all the normal stuff people already had, but still secure enough for military use. So instead of building some completely new device, Samsung took its normal Galaxy S12 and hardened it for actual government and Department of Defense use. The phone had a night vision mode so the screen could work with military goggles without ruining your vision. It had something called stealth mode, which could disable LTE, mute transmissions, and reduce radio signals if someone, let's say, didn't want the phone broadcasting its location. It could also connect to tactical radios, drone feeds, laser rangefinders, and other field equipment. It also ran on Samsung Knox security and eventually became approved as part of classified government communication systems. To this day, Samsung keeps going and has released newer secure Galaxy models, which I think definitely give a better user experience than the old and boring bulky phones, which just care about security and nothing else. One of the most hyped privacy phones ever came out in 2014, and it was called the Blackphone. This context is important to know, but in 2013, Edward Snowden leaked thousands of documents showing just how much global internet traffic, phone data, and online communication was being collected behind the scenes. Around that same time, secure email companies were shutting themselves down rather than hand over user data, and a company called Silent Circle basically decided if privacy was going to survive, it needed to start with smartphones. So in 2014, Silent Circle partnered with Geeks Phone and released Blackphone, a phone that looked completely normal from the outside but was built almost entirely around privacy. It ran a custom version of Android called Private OS and gave users actual control, which most phones didn't back then. You could block apps from reading your contacts, location, microphone, and other personal data years before normal Android phones started doing that. It also came with encrypted calls, encrypted texts, secure contacts, built-in VPN tools, and even a remote wipe if the phone got lost. Unlike the others, this one was open to the public, but while people said they cared about privacy, not many actually wanted to spend over $600 on it. After a second model launched, the phone just remained too niche and expensive for most people, and Blackphone eventually stopped being supported. One of the most ambitious government phones ever came out of Germany, and it was called Simko 3. which in German stood for Secure Mobile Communication. The project actually started back in the late 2000s after German government employees were given older secure phones that technically worked, but nobody liked using them. Shocking, I know. They were slow, heavily locked down, missing normal smartphone features, and from a lot of reports, some officials just kept using their personal phones anyway because it just was easier. So the goal of Simko 3 was pretty simply to make a government phone feel like a normal smartphone while still being secure enough for official government work. Instead of building some custom device from scratch, the German engineers actually took normal Samsung Galaxy S2 and later Samsung Galaxy S3 hardware and basically rebuilt the software around it. A big unique feature of the Simko 3 was that it essentially could run two phones at once. So for example, you could use the phone for normal stuff like apps, camera, Wi-Fi, and personal use, and then switch to another completely isolated side for secure email, government documents, and official communication. By 2013, it was officially approved for German government use, but it ended up having some performance complaints and missing features, and it wasn't super well received. By late 2014, support for the phone was cut, and public mentions of Simko slowly disappeared after that. One of the oldest secure smartphones still around today was made by a small company also in Germany called GSMK. Back in 2003, while most smartphones were still clunky PDA-like devices, GSMK introduced something called the Cryptophone and claimed it was the world's first smartphone with end-to-end encrypted voice calls. And unlike a lot of the government phones that came later, Cryptophone wasn't built around military hardware or self-destruct systems or bulky secure casings. Instead, GSMK took normal phones, mostly older Windows Mobile and HTC devices, stripped out huge parts of the software, and rebuilt them around making sure your calls stayed private even if the cellular network itself was compromised. So if someone was using a fake cell tower, intercepting carrier traffic, or trying to track your location through the network, the phone was designed to catch that. It even had something called a baseband firewall, which is something almost no normal smartphone has even today. Cryptophone really started getting attention around 2013 after the Edward Snowden leaks, and unlike a lot of these secure phones who have been forgotten after a few years, Cryptophone is still around today, with GSMK still selling secure phones, satellite phones, and other communications hardware more than 20 years later. One of the lesser known government phones came out of France in the early 2010s, and it was called the Bull Hooks. At the time, a lot of European governments had to face a pretty uncomfortable question of why some of their most sensitive communications were running through American consumer phones and software. So a French tech company called Bull decided to build its own secure smartphone designed specifically for government and enterprise use. Bull wanted this phone to secure basically your entire workday, so not just calls, but texts, documents, email, file storage, apps, just pretty much everything. It used AES 256 encryption, generated fresh keys for secure sessions, and even stored critical encryption material on certified smart cards built directly into the device instead of just normal storage. Later versions even had fingerprint scanners before that even became normal on smartphones, which makes me wonder if there are security phones today with tech that'll become standard for us soon. The last phone also comes from France, who selected Thales Group to build something completely new, and the result was a device called Theorem. And despite launching right as smartphones were starting to take over, Theorem didn't look modern at all. It looked more like an old flip phone with a physical keypad, tiny screen, and thick industrial casing. And that was completely intentional, because Theorem wasn't built for apps, emails, cameras, or any of the stuff normal phones cared about, but instead it was meant mainly for secure voice communication. It used government-built encryption hardware instead of normal commercial security chips, and could make encrypted calls over normal 2G, 3G, fixed telephone lines, military networks, basically whatever network was available, while encrypting everything on device. And it is weird that in a lot of deployments, it didn't even have things like apps, email, or sometimes even a contact list, because every extra feature was seen as another possible security risk. France originally planned around 20,000 units, and by 2015, reports said roughly 14,000 had actually been delivered to government ministries and military organizations. The phone, however, started getting replaced by newer, more modern security phones like the Samsung models, since of course nobody wants an old flip phone as their everyday phone. So it is interesting to know that people in these security positions also just want modern consumer phones, just like those iPhones without cameras. But overall, I hope you enjoyed. Hype and share the video if you did. Leave a comment about your thoughts on the video, and thank you for watching.